All right, welcome to the conversation on the TYT network. We're going to talk about For the People Act. There was a vote on it on Tuesday, and it was 50-50. Luckily, don't worry, Kamala Harris can break that tie, and so obviously it passed. There's no more gerrymandering. We're going to find out all the doctors. Oh no, it turns out the filibuster is still in place, and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema couldn't magically get 10 Republicans to support it. Well, we want to bring on someone who helped actually craft that legislation. Now, Elizabeth Hira is now policy counsel and Spitzer Fellow at the Brennan Center. But she was on the US Committee on House Administration or worked for them and helped craft what was originally known as HR 1. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So we all know why it's important. We've talked about it a lot on TYT, and I mentioned just a couple of the provisions here, but there are so many others. It expands voting rights, and then it has wonderful anti-corruption parts, although some of that has been stripped out. So they did, and so that leads me to my first question. They stripped out some of these things, including the matching funds from small donors. That's so important for campaign finance issues that Larry Lessig has worked on, and we've talked to him about it on the show, et cetera. And I know you've talked to him about it. And that was in return for getting it passed, presumably, but it remains entirely unpassed. So do you have any idea if there's a secret deal to get rid of the filibuster? Or did they do the concessions to Manchin for no reason at all?
So just two things, Cenk. And again, thank you so much for having me and for leading this important conversation for folks, particularly to understand where we are at this really exciting moment. I have had friends who have reached out to say, oh my gosh, is everything okay? And I've said, this is exactly what we expected. And this is just the beginning. We've got a summer of political maneuvering ahead of us that is going to be fantastic, because really what we've seen through this process is that the will of the people, the clamor of the people speaking, has actually moved what our representatives are actually doing. So to your first question about whether there have been concessions made for any sort of gain, what is great about the bill that we're actually looking at right now is that it is absolutely not a sealed deal. As you well know, there are lots of amendments that can be made and changes that will happen and negotiations that are very much ongoing. So even the proposal that Senator Manchin offered a little while ago to sort of garner Republican compromise did not get that compromise, but then got brought back to the table with the Democrats. And I think really a really good sign of good faith work that they are now building on that. And so as Senator Manchin has said, his proposal is not a closed universe. What was presented today on the floor is not a closed universe. There is a lot of work that will still be done on that bill. And that means that things like small dollar public financing, which frankly is critical to building an inclusive democracy that reflects Americans, is very much still in the conversation. But the only way that we keep in critical provisions of the bill like that is that the American people speak up about those being important. So I think that is, I am really optimistic and excited about the weeks ahead, because this is our opportunity to educate Americans about why this matters and what they can do to get it over the line, which frankly, I think they very much think that we can succeed at this.
So Elizabeth, it's an interesting conversation because honestly, I'm a little split on that. And so let me explain why. I'm an eternal optimist, and I believe that things definitely can change and we will win. Progressives will win. I'm sure of it. And it's not just because I'm an optimist, but I see the facts. Under 45-year-olds are overwhelmingly progressive, et cetera. I'm such an optimist, I helped start Just Democrats. And hey, turns out the optimism was warranted. We have 10 Just Democrats in Congress, right? And so I've been through all that. I understand that, and this is the most important issue. Okay, now, but in this fight, in the short term, there are some real challenges, okay? So you talk about the small dollar matching funds. We love that provision, and but honestly, once they take it out, putting it back in seems unlikely, right? And so, but I'm gonna let you tell us how that could possibly happen, right? And then what I'm worried about is if they're gonna have any prayer of getting Sinema to back at least amending the filibuster, which she just wrote an op-ed saying she won't do it at all, right? But if they're gonna have a prayer, then it would probably be amended to 55 instead of 50, because both her and Manchin have drawn a red line on getting rid of it. But if you're gonna get 5 Republican votes, then you're gonna have to water down the bill more, not less. So what am I missing about that?
Okay, so to start with your first point about smaller dollar public financing, again, really important to emphasize that the version of the bill as it exists or as it was discussed today is not a closed universe. There is still a lot of work that can be done. And I think it's really important that you raise small dollar public financing, again, because it's a great example of a really sort of grokkable concept that once the American people understand, hey, small dollar public financing paid for by corporate lawbreakers, not by taxpayers, is actually the key to getting everyday Americans to be able to run for office and represent the people, well, hey, then it becomes a priority. And again, it's the clamor of the American people that took us to today's vote, where like the Times is breathlessly talking about this, which is a far cry from 2 weeks ago when I think pundits were tripping all over themselves to declare the bill completely dead. Anybody who works in Washington knows that 2 weeks is an eternity. Well, a summer, we can watch mountains move. And I think, again, one of the things that I've seen that is so fascinating is that the folks who are opposed to this bill are relying on cynicism and despair to win. They want people to feel like there is hopelessness. And at every moment, the papers have been happy to report that everything is dead until there's this like Lazarus moment of the bill, and suddenly we're moving forward. And so, like you, I'm an eternal optimist, but I love data. And what I'm watching happen is Manchin is back at the table. There's a proposal, it gets rejected. Manchin is back at the table again. Suddenly we see him saying, hey, I actually may be voting with my friends to have debate on this bill. All of that is a result of public pressure, wonderful polling that shows that the people of West Virginia, both Republicans and Democrats, the majority of them are backing actually this bill, as well as people across the nation. This is, Jane Mayer leaked this dirty secret that the only people who the bill is bipartisan, and the only people who oppose it are, frankly, Republican leaders. And so they need to come into alignment with their folks. To your question about the filibuster changes, again, Manchin's op-ed 2 weeks ago suggested an absolute intransigence and unwillingness to negotiate. And yet here we are having this conversation after really sort of a swelling endorsement of what he's described as like a need for action, that inaction is not an option right now. So I think at some point, it's also important to point out that you cannot look at what is happening in America with this incredible, unprecedented wave of voter suppression that we have not seen since Jim Crow and say it is okay to sort of cross your legs and watch it happen if you are an elected official in America. And so at some point, people are clamoring for change. And thank goodness HR1 is packaged up and ready to go to answer this moment that we're in. And I hope we'll get to this too. But, the whole thing that I've been lucky to talk about with the Brennan Center is folks are paying attention to the bill for its ability to beat back voter suppression, but it is doing so much more, and it's really creating the infrastructure for an inclusive democracy that I'd love to talk about if we get the chance to.
Yeah, Elizabeth, the bill itself, and thank you for helping to craft it, is excellent. And I almost never say that
among
about
so
bills.
many people.
Yeah, I almost never say that about bills. I think they're usually, I'm very skeptical, and it's going to leak into this, right? They usually are stuff that's built to actually help corporations and the donors and not us. But this bill was an exception. It's a really good bill.
We are educating people about what is in this bill. And when people learn what's in there, that it's not just beating back voter suppression bit by bit, it is giving the franchise back to formerly incarcerated people living in the community. It's automatically registering 16 and 17-year-olds. It's adding tens of millions of eligible Americans onto the rolls through automatic voter registration. We know that one of the single greatest blocks to young people voting is a lack of same-day registration, right? Because young people are more mobile and they may not be paying attention to deadlines. That could literally add millions of young people to the voter rolls. And this is a sort of common sense stuff, as you say, Cenk, that is included in this bill. And people complain about how big it is, which I've never understood, because it's big because we have a lot to fix in our democracy. The bill being this big is Congress doing its job, and none of the pieces of it are frankly revolutionary. Many of them have been in place all over the country. What we're seeing right now is the need for this sort of federal minimum standard that is being offered by HR1, because states have shown that they're clearly not up to the task of not only protecting our right to vote, but letting regular people be at the table. And I think this will probably matter to your audience. One of the big things I always try to lift up is HR1 isn't just saying, hey, cool question from 1965, should we let you vote even if you're a minority, right? Which weirdly is still a question we're asking in 2021. HR1 is also saying, hey, what are the infrastructural changes that we would need to make in our democracy to actually let everyday Americans come to the table so their policies get centered? Instead of Washington's political infighting, what would it mean for us to maybe try to stop the planet from being on fire, educate our kids, and stop a global pandemic from happening? And that's the sort of governance that we'd be able to get to if we could just have regular people at the table. And I just want to share these stats quickly, because I think what we were talking about was letting your viewers be educated so they can force the media to acknowledge this is not just a voter bill. Right now, Congress doesn't represent us, as you said. Congress is the most diverse it has ever been in history. Right now, that Congress is 77% white. It is 73% male. Fewer than 5% of people in the last Congress reported ever having worked a blue-collar job. Women in the House of Representatives only got their own bathroom in the House in 2011. These structures were not designed to accommodate diverse people, and that means diverse people's priorities are not being lifted up. So when you don't see paid family leave or childcare or any of that, that's really why. It's because regular Americans aren't at the table. So HR 1 is our best shot to actually change these old inherited structures, which is what this equity paper is about that I've just written with the Brennan Center with my co-authors, Julia Boland and Julia Kirschenbaum. We're just telling the story of like, hey guys, we built a democracy based on exclusion. We have the opportunity to do the work to fix that right now. So let's seize this moment. And I think when you educate your viewers about that, they can hold the media to account. So they can't just be glib and dismissive and cynical about this being a voter bill that they can write off. Nope, this is our opportunity to have a democracy that works for us. And we need to let the media be on the front line of saying that, but the people saying that will actually make the difference.
Yes, I'm rooting for you 100%. I hope you're right. I love the work you did on this bill.
I need you to convince people of that.
And I love the report you put out of the Brennan Center. And we're way past time, but I'm just gonna say, look, the media recognizing corruption in Washington. Yes, by all means, let's all put pressure on to get them to do that. But they saw the Manchin tape. They still won't report on it. They won't do anything. They won't acknowledge that the donors obviously at a minimum have a tremendous effect, if not complete effect, on these political actors. And so for the media to get animated by the small dollar donation matching and the Disclose Act, then because if they did, Elizabeth, you're right. Republicans love those provisions. Republican voters, Republican politicians hate it, but Republican voters are like, oh wait, I could use my small dollar donors to help Trump or whoever they want to help, right? And so that they don't have to rely on big business, which I now hate, right? So I'm totally with you, and the media can be affected, but the corporate media is so bad at their job that it would be stunning to get that kind of action.
But I feel like this is where it's really important. Like, I know we're at time, but we are not in our parents' generation. We are not fighting the same. Look, a third of people alive today were alive during Jim Crow. That paired with the fact that this generation, Gen Z, that's watching your show, right? They are 48% non-white. We are politically engaged. Y and Z together are actually the largest voting bloc in America. We are 38% of the electorate, greater than the 28% of the boomers. And so to your point, yeah, corporate media is not on top of this, maybe because they don't want to be, and that we don't need to get into why, but you are on top of it. And your viewers, it's really important to contextualize. Your viewers are the ones who are making this difference. The people who are paying attention because they're smart enough to know that they're not getting all of the news from sort of a very specific box set of media, they're actually paying attention. And sort of the way I want to capstone that is, look, I was working on this in the House in 2019. We put our blood, sweat, and tears into this bill, and it was all we were focused on for a really long time. And when I passed, I did, look, I'm an immigrant kid from a working class family. I felt like this was what America was about. I remember, like I told you, I was sitting on the House floor. We're watching John Lewis speak about the bill. I felt like there were bald eagles flying over the Capitol, right? This is what America is about. Amazing. I go home and I open up the New York Times, and it's like barely page 4. But they're like, Democrats did some technocratic thing. Who cares? Nobody cares. Like, whatever. Democracy's over. It's uninteresting. That's the Times 2 years ago. You could tell me that 2 years later, I would be with the amazing Brennan Center writing this like report that people are like hungry for information about, that this is all over the news. The Times is breathlessly reporting on today's votes. Like, you guys paying attention has made the difference, because you're suddenly saying, hey, you've been telling us to be resigned because our democracy is not fixable. Okay, boomer, just give up. And that's not what people are settling for right now. So I think this is our moment. And again, they want you to believe that this will not work, because that's the only way they can win. And so we actually can win because we're paying attention and calling for our representatives to actually represent our interests and changing what the status quo is about who gets power in America. So That's what you guys are capable of when you're paying attention.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so let me double down on trying to be helpful. Everybody watching out there, I love you, but you're not going to affect cinema. Cinema's unmovable unless you're a giant donor. go affect the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN, because their coverage could move representatives, et cetera. They do pay attention to those outlets, fortunately or unfortunately, and those outlets have been ridiculously conservative. And if they actually accurately reported how bipartisan these bills are in the electorate, it could make all the difference. I mean, if we defeated the talking point that the corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans are bipartisan, that would make not only all the difference in this bill that's so important, but in so many other bills. Because those guys are not at all bipartisan if you look at the polling in the country. The polling in the country indicates that America hates corruption and would love so many parts for the people. In fact, they already polled it and they did love it. So go pressure the media in that way. Elizabeth, thank you.
And just get
yeah.
Just get information, because like my Twitter feed is covered in this stuff. Brennan's Twitter feed is covered in it. We are giving you what you need to know to let the media know that you know what's in the bill, and then they're held accountable to actually cover it properly, which, as you say, Cenk, will I think actually move the people who listen. So thank you so much for letting me chat with you and for just using this platform in this extraordinary way for this frankly transformational opportunity for America.
No problem. Thank you for coming on, Elizabeth. We really appreciate it. Elizabeth Hara from the Brennan Center. Check out our report and get involved. Thanks. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.